All right, it's 2 o'clock Eastern time, top of the hour. So let's get started with the webinar. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Catherine Rittenbach. I'm a technical applications specialist with De Novo Software, the maker of FCS Express, flow cytometry and image cytometry analysis software. Today, our webinar is called New Quadrant Gate Features in FCS Express 7.24.0024. Today, we're having this webinar because we've recently made a change to the way that quadrants are handled in FCS Express. And today I'm going to go over some of those changes. The webinar is being recorded, so you'll be able to view it on our website and on our YouTube channel in about a week's time. If you'd like to ask questions during our webinar today, feel free to enter those in the chat or the Q&A section, and my colleague Greg is on the line and he'll be able to help with answering those questions. So first I'd like to go over why we made these changes to quadrants. So now in version 720, 722, and 724, quadrants are gates. Why did we do this? One reason is to modernize the architecture of the program. Two, bugs relating to gates and quadrants were previously handled differently, but now that quadrants are gates, those bugs that might come up in the future can be fixed more quickly. And bugs that are occurring with gates can also be fixed in the quadrants realm at the same time. Third, we wanted to eliminate discrepancy between reported quadrant and gate statistics. In the past, you may have noticed if you drew a gate directly on top of a quadrant and tried to report some statistics, there may have been a couple of events that were different between the events in the quadrant and the events in the gate, and therefore your statistics may have been slightly different between the two. Now that quadrants are gates, this is not an issue anymore. So we're going to go over a lot today. If you ever want to reference in text form and in an accessible form in the future the information we're going over today, you can visit our knowledge base all about quadrant gates. So our landing page for that section is FAQ/quad-gates on our homepage on denovosoftware.com on our website. So I'll show you what that looks like. So if we go to denovosoftware.com/FAQ/quadgates, we'll have our landing page here. So we're starting with this article, giving a little bit of background, and then down at the bottom, a little bit more on some of the user options that are new. And you'll also be able to see on the side in this navigator, we have a whole section on updates for quadrant gates. So you can see all of these different articles that we've written and provided to clarify any confusion that you might have. So I'm going to be going over a lot of the information that can be found in those articles today. So let's go over our agenda. First, we're going to cover the quadrant user options. So this is new and can perhaps be a little bit tricky to understand at first, so I want to go over it step by step to really clarify that for you. The second topic we're going to cover are quadrants that were previously converted to gates, how that's handled now in 724. Third, we'll go over formatting options for quadrants, including linking quadrants, percentile quadrants, and floating quadrants. Next, we'll go over data-specific quadrants. So now that quadrants are gates, you can make them data-specific, just like any other gate in FCS Express. And finally, I'll cover a few changes that you might notice to the statistics relating to quadrants. Right. So first, let's go over the quadrant user options. So I'm going to show an example with an existing layout that was saved in an earlier version of FCS Express. So it was saved in a version before version 720. So at the time the layout was saved, the quadrants were just quadrants. They were not gates at that time. So I'm going to open this layout. And when I open that older layout, I'm presented with this Quadrants option window. This is going to appear every time that you open one of those older layouts that was saved before version 720. So I'm going to go piece by piece here and explain what this means so that it's not so overwhelming. Essentially, we have these two radial buttons. The first one is initialize quadrant options with new defaults, and the second one is initialize quadrant options to behave more like previous versions of FCS Express. So these are what I would call presets or preset options. So we understand that some users prefer that quadrants behave like gates in FCS Express, and they like this new functionality. Other users prefer that quadrants behave like the quadrants did before 720. And so we've incorporated extra user options here in order to allow the quadrants to behave in that familiar fashion. So you have this option when you open up the layout to choose the first preset or the second preset. Now, what are these controlling? Well, they're controlling user options in your user profile. And if you want to view what those user options actually are and how they're going to be set according to each of those presets, you can expand this option down here called View Current Options or Customize. So you'll be able to see, depending on the radio button that is selected, those user options that will be applied are going to be changing. So if we pick this first preset, you'll see that some of these check boxes are check marked and particular radio buttons down here are selected. But then if we select the other preset to use FCS Express more like older quadrants, then you'll see some different user options selected here. All right, so what's going to happen after we select a radio button here and click OK? Well, those user options here that are displayed here are going to actually be applied and incorporated in your account. And then you'll be able to move forward with using those user options. So I'm going to show you what each of these looks like in that older layout. And we're going to go characteristic by characteristic so that you have a full understanding of what this actually entails. So the big decision here is, do you want quadrants to behave like gates, or do you want the quadrants to behave more like in previous versions of FCS Express? There may be some users, these are sufficient for most users. However, there may be some users who like some of the behavior of the older quadrants and like some of the behavior of the newer quadrants, and they want to maybe customize those user options a little bit more. They can select this third radio button, and this allows you to check mark and uncheck these particular user options down here before you click OK. All right, so I'm going to go over today what it looks like when we select option 1, and then we'll go through the layout and we'll go through each of these characteristics, and then I'll select this and we'll go through the process again and I'll show you what each of these characteristics is going to look like in the layout. So first, let's choose this first preset. And then we also have a checkbox down here that says do not show again. So like I said before, this window is going to pop up every time you're opening up an older layout. And that could become bothersome, especially if you know you're sure you want to use one or the other preset and you don't want to have to be presented with this again and make that choice again in the future. So you do have that option to not show again here. I'm going to select the first preset and click OK. So let's see what this looks like in our older layout. All right, so this is one of our templates. This is our SciTech 14 color immunoprofiling template that's available on our application examples page. I'm going to go to my third page here, the initial gating. and then zoom in a bit. So we're going to focus on this plot and these quadrants here. So these quadrants were created before the layout was saved, so before quadrants became gates. What happened when we just opened this layout now? Well, every set of quadrants that is in this layout was converted to gates. And that happens automatically. That happens regardless of the preset or the user options that you've chosen. So I'm going to go characteristic by characteristic, and we'll use our cheat sheet here in order to keep track of those characteristics for each of these presets. So we chose the first preset, and we're going to go one by one and show what that means in this layout. So let's be able to read all of that. Okay. So I'm going to start actually with the second characteristic here. So this is saying that quadrant gates will be visible in gate views and gate navigators. So we have a gate view here, and if I right click in here and expand all, what I'd like you to see is that now, this wasn't here before, but now in 724, now that we've opened up our older layout in 724, we are seeing the quadrants appearing in our gate view. So we have one quadrant set listed in our gate view, in our gate hierarchy, for every set of quadrants that we have on our layout. So we have quads for plot 5, quads for plot 27, quads for plot 19, and quads for plot 22. And if you are not sure which plot these are coming from or on, you can always hover over a plot to see what the plot number is there. And you're also able to add the plot number to the header or the footer of any plot if you'd like to as a token. And you'll notice that this has been added to the hierarchy. So this is going to be visible within the gate view and then also in the gate navigator. So if we go to view, gate navigator, we'll also be able to see it in the gate navigator. So you'll see those quadrant sets here. Okay. Then our first characteristic here, the quadrant gates will be children of the gate that was applied to the plot when the quadrant was created. So what does this mean? Well, I mentioned that the quadrant sets are actually embedded within this hierarchy, and that means that they are children of another parent in the hierarchy. And how does FCS Express choose what that parent should be? So for example, let's pick this one because we're focusing on this plot. The quads for plot 5, that's these quadrants. This quadrant set is a child of the monocytes gate. And FCS Express chose to make it a child of the monocytes gate because the monocytes gate is the current gate on this plot. We're only displaying monocytes on this plot. And so FCS Express is assuming that we want the quadrants, the quadrant gates here on this plot to be a child of the current gate on this plot. And if you're not sure what the current gate on the plot is, you're always able to go to the gating tab while that plot is selected and see current gate here. And it's saying, indeed, this is our monocytes gate. All right. The third characteristic here, quadrant gates will be visible only on plots displaying the X and Y parameters they were created on. So now that quadrants are gates, they're going to behave like gates in that every quadrant set is associated with 2 parameters. You may be familiar with that behavior for traditional gates like a polygon gate. For example, this monocytes gate here is dependent on CD45 parameter and the side scatter parameter. In a similar way, this quadrant set is dependent on the CD14 and the CD16 parameter. So what this characteristic is saying is this quadrant set is only going to remain visible on the plot as long as CD14 and CD16 are on those plot axes. If we make a change there, the quadrants are going to go away. So let's show that. Let's change the CD14 x-axis to CD8, and you'll notice that those quadrants are no longer there. But if we go back to show CD14 on the x-axis, then our quadrant set is visible now on this plot. If you want to know what parameters a particular quadrants are associated with, you can double click on the quadrant set, and that will open one of the potential formatting windows for that quadrant set. You'll be able to see that the parameter numbers are listed here, the parameter numbers that the quadrants are associated with. It would be parameter 9 and parameter 18. And if you're not sure what those are, you can go down to this center point section and you'll be able to see a more descriptive name for those parameters. So it's parameter 19, which is our floor V450 and our floor R668. All right, let's go on to the next characteristic. So relating to quadrants behaving like conventional gates, you are going to be prompted to name quadrant gates. So what does that mean? Well, if you remember in other with other gates in FCS Express, every time you try to make a gate, you're prompted to name that gate and set some gate properties. So let's do a little demonstration of this. I'm going to go to the Insert tab and insert a new density plot. And let's say we change our X and Y axes here, forward and side scatter. And then I want to add a rectangle gate. So I'll click on rectangle here. And when I add my rectangle gate, I'm prompted to create a new gate here to give it a name. I have the option to replace an existing gate, change the gate color, and adjust some other gate properties. So we're used to this behavior with regular gates, but we're not used to that behavior with quadrants. If you're coming from using an older version of FCS Express before 720. Now with quadrant gates, when we go to the gating tab and we hit quadrants and we try to add quadrants to our plot, we are prompted to create new quadrants. We can pick a parent gate if we want to, or we can replace existing quadrants. And then we are also given the opportunity to name our new quadrant set. So this window is going to be appearing when you create new quadrants on a plot if you have selected this first preset. So if we are still going over what happens when we've selected this first preset of user options. So you can name that quadrant set according to 3 lines here, a prefix, the current X parameter, and the current Y parameter. So this is the default name, what it's going to appear as. And in this case, I've chosen the parameters forward scatter and side scatter. That's not typically what you would draw quadrants on. So let's try something else. Let's do something a little more realistic, like CD4 and CD8. So we get something that's more like what you would do. So under the gating tab, we'll click quadrants and click on the plot in order to add those quadrants. So we're prompted to create those new quadrants. Now, regarding the naming, the prefix is just going to be naming them Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4. But you can definitely enter your own text here to customize that. And then we'll pull in by default the x-axis parameter name and the y-axis parameter name according to what's on that axis. And then how would you be able to read those quadrant names? Well, the quadrant names are going to look like this. It's going to be, for example, Q1 colon CD4 minus CD8 plus. And we have these lines here to point out which quadrant each of those labels is referring to. So Q1 CD4 negative and CD8 positive, that's going to be referring to this upper left quadrant, for example. So we have this line, this dotted line here showing you where that quadrant is going to be located. Right? So we have one label here for a preview for you for each of our four quadrants. And then we do have a quadrant property here that you can select. So I'm going to describe a little bit more about how to set data-specific gates individually later for quadrants. But you do have the option here, just like with regular gates, that every time the quadrant moves, you can set it to become a data-specific gate. So this is an option if you prefer that behavior. All right, so I'm going to press cancel. All right. Oh, actually, let's go forward with that so that we can see what it looks like when we actually create the quadrants. So I'll just keep all our default options here and press OK. All right. So we have our four quadrants. And then how did that appear in our gate view? Let's shrink this so that we can see where it appeared. So we have our hierarchy, and our top gate is our singlets gate. But we now have this quadrant 1 quadrant set available in our hierarchy, and it's named exactly as we expected, and we expand that so we're going to be able to see all four of the quadrant gates within that quadrant set. And how did FCS Express determine the position in the hierarchy? Well, the parent gate when we were creating this was no gate, and that is because that is the gate that's currently displayed on this plot. That's the current gate. That's the gate that this plot is gated on. No gate or all events being displayed here. So that is this became a child of no gate or the root gate. So it's showing up here outside of our singlets gate in the hierarchy. So that covers this section here, this characteristic. You will be prompted to name quadrant gates. So that just means every time you are creating a new set of quadrants on a plot, you will be prompted with a window for creating those quadrants. And the last characteristic here is there's no need to convert quadrants to gates for downstream analysis. So before version 720, you may remember that you would have to right-click on a plot and choose an option for converting a quadrant to a gate if you wanted it to appear in your gate hierarchy and if you wanted it to be applied somewhere else in the layout or be used for reporting statistics or something like that. Now, we don't have to do that anymore because automatically every time you create quadrants, they are going to be gates. And all of our existing quadrants in our layout have already automatically become gates and are accessible in the gate view or the gate hierarchy to be applied elsewhere. So I mentioned in this first characteristic that the quadrant gates are going to be children of the gate that was applied to the plot when the quadrant was created. So we saw that in a couple of examples already. If you don't like the position, the current position of a quadrant set within the gating hierarchy, you are always free to click and drag gates and quadrant sets within the gate hierarchy. So that could be done within the gate view or within the gate navigator. So for example, if we wanted to move one of our quadrant sets to be, let's say, we want this new quadrant set that we created. We don't want it to be a child of all events. We want it to be a child of our lymphocytes gate. We can click and drag it onto whatever we want that new parent gate to be. And then we will be able to see it as a child of the lymphocytes gate. So that's you are free to rearrange those quadrants as needed within the gate hierarchy. Okay, so we're done going over this first set of user options and characteristics for this first preset. I would like to just show you in case in the future you would like to go in and explore those user options further or make customizations. You can go to the File tab, Options, and choose the Quadrants section here in the left pane. You're going to view those quadrant user options here. So it starts up here with when new quadrants are created, create them hierarchically, and all of the user options below that are the ones that were appearing and controlled by this window here. All right, so let's try this process again and now explore what happens if we choose the second preset. So I'm going to open up the same layout, and now we are given this window, and I'm going to choose the second preset and press OK. So in this case, quadrant gates will behave more like the quadrants from previous releases of FCS Express. All right, so this is our same SciTech template. All right, and we're looking at our same page as before, the same quadrants here. So let's go one by one on these characteristics to better understand what's happening now that we've chosen the second preset. So let's start with the second characteristic. Quadrant gates will be hidden in the gate views and the gate navigators. So before version 720, those quadrants were not appearing in the gate hierarchy in the gate view or the gate navigator. So if we right click on that gate view and expand all, we'll notice a difference from what we were seeing earlier today. We're not seeing any of those quadrant sets appearing in our hierarchy. So this is maybe a little bit less overwhelming, especially if you have a lot of quadrants in your layout already. Okay. And then our first characteristic here is that those quadrant gates will be created under the root of the hierarchy, and the statistics retrieved by them will only depend on the plot they are displayed on. So what does this mean? I am going to, in order to explain this and kind of demonstrate it, I am going to display the quadrant sets in the gate view here. So it's not permanently, they're not permanently hidden. You can unhide them. You can allow them to be displayed in your gate view or your gate navigator. So I will show you how you can do that in your gate view. So we're going to right click and go to the format menu. We'll go to Gates to Display category, and then we have a checkbox here, Allow Quads and Quad Gates to be displayed. So we'll hit that checkbox, and now our migrated quadrants that have been converted from quadrants to gates by opening this layout in 724, we have this section called Migrated Quadrants. All right, so what I would like to demonstrate here relating to this first characteristic, the quadrant gates are created under the root of the hierarchy. So that means they are right under the topmost level of our hierarchy, which is in this case, no gate or all events. And you can see it's at the same level. All the migrated quadrants are at the same level as our first singlets gate. And this allows us to make sure that the quadrant statistics are depending only on the plot that they are displayed on. So let's demonstrate this with some percentages. It's very important to some labs and some individuals that when they are viewing quadrant statistics, all of the percentages that they're seeing on those quadrants on the plot add up to 100%. And with this functionality, this behavior, that is going to be the case. So we'll right click on here. I'm going to recreate the quadrant text boxes so that we can view our percentages instead of the names. And what you'll notice here is that all of those percentages are adding up to 100%. And that is going to be true regardless of what this plot is gated on. So right now this plot is gated on monocytes. The current gate is monocytes. If we want to change that, maybe we change that to be CD3, our percentages are always going to add up to 100%. And that's because the quadrants are outside of the gating hierarchy. Okay, so that is explaining this first characteristic. I'm just going to jump over to one of the questions that was submitted. Will the plotted data update if you change the position of the quadrant in the gate hierarchy? That is a great question. Yes, if you are, if we've chosen this first preset, then our quadrants are being added as children of some of the other gates in the hierarchy, depending on what the current gate was on that plot. If you do move the quadrants around in the hierarchy, then the reported statistics, they will most likely change, especially if the statistics are being sourced from a plot. So yes, I would recommend being careful with that and be intentional if you are moving quadrants around in the hierarchy. And if you do need help with that at any point, we're happy to help answer questions about that are more specific to your layout. So if you don't want that to happen, if you don't want to be concerned about the statistics changing as you're moving through the hierarchy, then and you only want your quadrant statistics to be dependent on a particular plot, then choosing this option and having all of your quadrants under the root gate will help to hinder that and make it a little bit less confusing. Another question came in, will these options have to be determined if each user for each user if all users use the same template? That's a great question. So the user options are on a user by user basis, depending on the account that's logged in. So if you are using an internet dongle license and each user has their own de novo software accounts and credentials, then every individual does need to set their own well, they can control their own user options and they can control the way that FCS Express is behaving. If you have a counter code license or a network license, and each user option or each user account is selected and stored in the computer itself, then depending on each person who has a user account, the user options are going to be can be customized on a user by user basis or an account by account basis. So the short answer is yes, each individual who is opening the template may choose their own user options. All right, let's go on to another characteristic. The third one here is that quadrant gates will continue to show on the plot even when the X and Y parameters on the plot are changed. So in this case, we're showing CD14 and CD16 on the X and Y axes. Because we want FCS Express in this case to behave like it did before version 720 with the older quadrants before quadrants were gates, we want to be free to change these parameters on the X and Y axis and expect that the quadrants will still be there. So that will happen here. Let's change this CD14 on the x-axis to CD3. So when we do that, then the quadrants are still visible. What is actually happening is that the parameters that the quadrant set are dependent on are actually updating. So do let's demonstrate that in a different plot here. So we're going to go to the Insert tab and insert a new plot here. And let's just choose CD3 versus CD8, and we'll insert some new quadrants here. So those new quadrants are here, Q1, CD3 versus CD8. So what will happen if we change the CD3 to another parameter? Well, it's going to actually update on the quadrants itself. So we'll change this to CD14. So now this naming here is quadrant 1 CD14 versus CD8. So that is what's happening when we make a change here. The quadrant set itself is now defined upon two different parameters. Okay, and then the next characteristic is with this preset, you will not be prompted to name the quadrant gates when you are creating new quadrants. So let's try this again. We're going to insert a density plot, and I'll display CD4 and CD8. I'll go to the gating tab and I'm going to choose quadrants and then click on that plot in order to add the quadrants. And you'll notice that we were not prompted to name the quadrants or set any quadrant properties. The default naming scheme is going to be used. So you'll notice that the quadrants here have been added to the gate view, and they are going to be named according to the parameters on the X and Y axis. And you'll also notice that when we've added this new quadrant set, the new quadrant set was added to the hierarchy under the root gate. So it's outside of the rest of the hierarchy, just like the migrated quadrants. So it has that same behavior as the migrated quadrants in terms of not organizing hierarchically. All right, and lastly, quadrant to gate linking is performed through formatting options. So in the past, again, you might have had to right-click on a plot and click Convert Quadrant to Gate if you wanted to use that quadrant elsewhere in your layout or apply it elsewhere. So if you're used to doing that step and you kind of liked the behavior there, you're familiar with that behavior, then we still have a way that you can do something similar. So that will be done in a formatting menu now. So we'll have that plot selected, and we can go to the Format tab at the top and choose Selected Gate or Quads. And we will have to select the center point of the quadrants in order to see the editing and formatting options. So I'm going to go one by one in a bit, but I want to just point out in here, there's this linked quad gates section. So we have this quadrant set selected. We can click Create if we want to create a linked quadrant. So we'll be able to enter a value here. Maybe I want to call this my CD4 positive, CD8 positive gate, and we can give it a unique color if we'd like. And then we have to choose which of the four quadrants from this quadrant set we want to convert, not convert to a gate, but link to an individual gate. So let's say we want to pick CD4 positive and CD8 positive, and then we can pick if we want it to be a child of a different gate. So we'll click OK. And now we're seeing that we have a linked quadrant gate here that's linked to the CD4 positive, CD8 positive section, or the upper right quadrant here. And you'll notice that that has appeared in our hierarchy now. And you'll be able to see the linking by these two circles. So when we click on that gate that we just created, my CD4 plus CD8 plus gate, you'll see that it's actually linked to Q2 and CD4 plus CD8 plus. So this is the existing gate within the Q2 quadrant set that was already there when we created these quadrants in the beginning. And now this gate can be moved around in the hierarchy. It can be dragged onto another gate to apply it else, or it could be dragged onto another plot to apply it there. It could be dragged into a text box or a spreadsheet to report statistics. So that gives you that same flexibility and same type of behavior that you had before version 720. All right, so those are all of those characteristics, and I hope that going over that one by one made this window a lot less overwhelming, and now you are a little bit more familiar with that and have an idea of which preset you might prefer based on your preferred behavior in FCS Express and the way that you like to use FCS Express. So let's go back to our agenda on our other layouts. Okay, so we've gone over this first section, and these other points are much quicker, so we'll be able to go through those in the remaining time here. So let's jump on to the next section. Let's go over quadrants that were previously converted to gates. So I'm going to open up that same layout again because we have actually done that. And with the quadrants that were previously converted to gates, the behavior is going to be the same between these two presets. So I'm just going to pick the first preset. That's the default. Right? And then let's take a look at our gate view again. So expand all here. All right. So I want to draw your attention to these three gates here. We have non-classical, intermediate, and classical. These were what happened, what were created when before the layout was previously saved, the user had right-clicked on this plot and chosen to convert each of those three gates to each of these three quadrants to gates, and they named them non-classical, intermediate, and classical. So this is actually what the gating hierarchy is going to look like when you open up the layout if you have quadrants that were already converted to gates in previous versions of FCS Express in the older layout. So you'll see that it looks like the other gates. It will have the same name that you gave it before. It will have the same color that you gave it before. And the behavior now when opening this layout in 724 is that these individual gates are linked to the quadrant set that was also created upon opening the layout. And you'll be able to notice that linkage with those two dots here. And this is the same type of linking that we just went over a moment ago. And if you want to view the linking, you can double click on the gate that you had the gate that was previously converted from a quadrant, and you'll be able to see in the gate properties the linked quadrant information, and you can see which other quadrant it's actually linked to. And so in this case, it's quads for plot 5, the upper left quadrant of this quadrant set. All right. Now you may encounter a situation in which you want to actually show these gates on a plot. So maybe you create a new plot and you want to show this gate. We can go to the Insert tab and, for an example, create a new plot, and we'll set the parameters to the same as the that are associated with the gate. So we'll set it to CD14 and CD16. And then we can right click and choose show gates. So now when we hover over this, we have the opportunity to show any of these gates that are associated with those two parameters. So we are absolutely seeing that non-classical, intermediate, and classical gate that are in our hierarchy. But you also have the opportunity now that quadrants are gates and they've been converted automatically to gates. When we open this layout, then we're going to be able to display those quadrants here as well. But if you are more familiar with your gates that you actually gave a unique name to, let's say we wanted to show our intermediate one, we can click that and then it will appear here on our plot. And it's linked to our quadrants. So as we move our quadrants center point, then you'll see that that gate is going to move as well. All right. So let's go into some formatting options for our quadrants. All right. If we select, let's create a new plot here. And I'll show CD4 versus CD8 and just show my lymphocytes here. So I'll drag my lymphocytes over to apply it to this plot. And I'm going to go to the gating tab and add some quadrants here. And I'll just keep the default names, that's fine. And they're a child of the lymphocytes gate. All right, so if we want to explore some formatting options, let's go to Format tab at the top, and we have that center point selected, so we'll choose the selected gate or quads button here. So let's point out at the top that we have our gating hierarchy listed here for those quadrants that are currently selected. We're showing the name, we're showing the parameter numbers that are associated with that set. We can change the line colors for that gate. And then we have this newer option here for linking quadrants. Now, this is different from linked quad gates that we went over before. This is how you can link multiple sets of quadrants together so that they move in synchrony. So let's give this a try. We perhaps want to have these quadrants moving in synchrony with other quadrants. So if I insert another plot here that's displaying the same parameters, CD4 and CD8, and I have another set of quadrants over here. It's a different set of quadrants. You can see that they have different center points right now. But what if I want to link them together? I want to link those center points. I want those quadrants to be moving together then and have similar coordinates. Then what we can do is click on the center point of one of those quadrants, and under the linked quadrants section of this formatting category, we can click link. And then we have our window, and it allows us to choose which other quadrants in the layout we want to link these quadrants, these selected quadrants to. So you'll get a preview of all of the plots that currently have quadrants. So we want to link it to this this plot, the quadrants on this plot. So we'll select that here and click OK. And now those quadrants are going to be moving together. They are going to be linked. So if we move the center point on this plot, then you're going to be able to see them moving over here and vice versa. They're not locked at all. The center point's not locked, but they are going to be moving together. Right. And you'll see that link listed here. Okay. Now below we have this center point section that is similar to or it's similar to how it was in previous versions of FCS Express 720, 722. We are going to be able to see the value of the center point for each axis, and we'll be able to lock it. So what happens if we lock this axis? Well, we can only now move the quadrant, the horizontal line on the quadrants, because the other axis is locked. And as we make changes, you're going to notice that the values here of the center point coordinates are going to update. You can absolutely assign a token value to be the value of the center point in the X or Y axis, but it's pretty unlikely that you're going to need to do that because we have a bunch of other built-in tools for doing linking and such as needed. But if you would like to set that value according to a particular token, then you're free to do that. We also have an option to set a center point as a percentile. So let's click on that, and we can set the center point along the x-axis or the y-axis or both according to percentiles. So we can click the radio button, set the percentile of the selected plot's axis. So for the x-axis, we can perhaps set this to the 70th percentile, and maybe we want to do it for the y-axis as well, set this to the 20th percentile, and click OK. And now we're going to see a token has been added to each of these sections, each of these fields, and the center point will be moving as the percentile according to it will be set at the percentiles that we indicated, but as you change from file to file, then the center point coordinate itself might be changing according to the new data file that's there, because it's always going to be searching for the 20th percentile and the 70th percentile along those axes. If you are not wanting to use tokens anymore in the fields, you can click Convert Tokens into Value, and that'll show you what the actual coordinates are. And then if you want to go back to manually being able to move the center point with the mouse, then you can uncheck those locked checkboxes. You can also make quadrants floating. So you can click that checkbox, and then you are going to be given 5 nodes to move instead of just one. So you can utilize that if you'd like. We've already gone over the linked quad gates section, and then the last option here is allow gate edit. So this does something similar to locking the center point, whereas if you click the false radio button, then you try to move any of the nodes there of that quadrant, then you're going to get this message that the properties of the selected gate do not allow editing it. So that is just a kind of an extra setting for locking that down if you want to. Okay, so those are those formatting options. Next, we'll go over how to set the quadrants to be data-specific quadrants. So we have an example here where we have forward scatter on the x-axis and side scatter on the y-axis. We've drawn a gate around our lymphocytes. We've applied that lymphocytes gate to this plot here. So we're only showing our lymphocytes. And then we have on the x and y axis CD4 and CD8. And we've added some quadrants here. And you'll see in our gate navigator that those quadrants are under the gate 1. So they're children of gate 1. All right, so what happens if I want to set these quadrants to be data specific? For all of my data files or for each of my iterations here, I want to set a unique gate position or a unique quadrant position. So now that quadrants are gates, we actually can do that pretty easily. So if we want to set a unique position for sample 1, we'll click our center point of our quadrants, go to the gating tab at the top and select data specific gate. And then we are free to move that anywhere we want. And the new position is only going to apply to sample 1 or iteration number, sample 1 here. And you're going to be able to see in our gate navigator that there is indeed a data specific gate assigned for sample 1. Then we go to sample 2 and we're reverting back to our universal gate position. Then for sample 2, maybe we want to set this as a data specific quadrant as well. So we'll click the center point and again click data specific gate. Now we've created a data specific gate for sample 2 and we're free to move that around anywhere we want. And those will be remembered, those data specific gates. So let's jump over to maybe sample 5. We want to set a unique position. We'll click that center point, click data specific gate, and then we're moving that over. Okay, so now we have for 3 different data files, data specific gate, a unique gate position, and that's remembered. So if we go back to sample 1, we have this unique position. Sample 2, we have a different unique position. Sample 3, we have a different unique position. Sample 3, we have the universal position. Same for 4, and then sample 5, we have our unique position. All right, so that is how data specific quadrants will work. And one last thing I'd like to go over are just a few changes to statistics that you might notice. Before I do that, I just want to show you everything that we went over today within those quadrant options and this new quadrant options window. You can find out more about that and refresh your memory on our knowledge base articles. So we have this one particular knowledge base article that kind of walks you through step by step. This might be useful to send to your colleagues as kind of a cheat sheet to go step by step how to interpret that window and also learning about preset 1 and preset 2. Right, so we have another knowledge base article on why the statistics might have been slightly affected. So there are 2 main reasons why you might notice a difference in your reported statistics now that quadrants are gates. One of them is because with quadrants now, with quadrant gates, the borders of the quadrants are extending all the way to infinity in every direction. In earlier versions of FCS Express, there was this option in the formatting menu for any plot under specific options category called include out of range values in quads. So by default, this was the of all by default, only the events on the plot were being included in the quadrants and therefore being included in the quadrant statistics. So now that quadrants are gates and the lines are extending to infinity, all of the data on the plot, even if it's out of range, are going to be included in the quadrants. So here's one quick example. Before quadrants were gates, your percentages might have looked like this. You might have had some out of range events, and therefore those quadrants are not, the percentages are not adding up all the way to 100%. But now that the quadrants have been converted to gates, those lines are extending even out of range, and all those out of range values are being included in the quadrants. And so our percentages now can add up to a different value. They can add up to 100. Okay, that's one example. And then the other reason that your statistics might be slightly different is that earlier, FCS Express had to decide if an event was on the line, which quadrant does that event belong to? And similarly with gates, if an event is on the line, on the border of a gate, FCS Express had to make a different decision. Is that event inside the gate or outside the gate? And because quadrants had a different architecture than gates, that decision-making process was different. Now that quadrants are gates, that decision-making process is the same. And so you may see a percentage increasing ever so slightly because an event on the line may have been pushed into the adjacent quadrant. Um, so it will be a very small percentage change if you do notice any difference there in that statistic. All right, so thank you so much everyone for joining us today. If you are ready to upgrade to the new version, you can on our website choose the downloads tab at the top. And if you have never tried FCS Express before and you want to try our free trial, you can use that for 30 days and you can access that again on our homepage under the free trial link here. And our knowledge base articles are accessible at this link. If you have questions, you can ask us at support@denovosoftware.com. And then we also have a few other webinars this week that you'll be able to register for on our website if you'd like to. Anywhere at the bottom of any page, we'll see this webinars link, and you can click that to register for our 2 future webinars. And then all of them are being recorded and will be available on our YouTube channel and our website within about a week afterward. All right, so we have one other question that has come in. I'll stay on the line for a couple more minutes. If you need to go, then thanks so much for joining and have a great rest of your day. So the question that's come in for user option 1, if you change the gate being displayed for a plot with a quadrant, does the quad disappear from the plot and change places in the gate hierarchy? That's a good question. No, the answer is no. The quadrants will, if you change the gate that a plot is gated on, like this one, this plot is gated on gate 1. If we change that to, well, we would have to let's create another gate to demonstrate this. So we have gate 2 now. Gate 2 is over here. So we change this to gate 2, then our quadrants are still going to be there, and the quadrants are still in the same place of the hierarchy. All right, thanks everyone. If you have further questions, I'll be on here for about another minute, but any other questions afterward, please feel free to contact support and we're happy to answer them.